I've done a lot of work on this channel exposing the level to which journalists in this country tend to want to cause harm for the most vulnerable people in the worst kinds of ways through lies or deceptions or mistruths or disinformation or deliberate attempts to obscure reality to try and paint a vulnerable minority as somehow being the villain. No single group in this country has been on the sharp end of this more than the disabled over the last 20 years or so. Trans people have had it pretty bad, to be sure, but the disabled have constantly been under attack by the press in this country under the assumption that they are claiming benefits they shouldn't get, they're somehow scroungers, or they're faking it, or they're over-embellishing things, or the system isn't weeding these people out, or it's not forcing them into work quickly enough, whatever it might be. Over and over and over again, we have constantly had manufactured consent pushed down our throats to try and somehow point the finger at the disabled for being to blame for the state of the country, rather than, broadly gesturing at literally everything else that's happening in this country, okay? And journalists in this country are the worst. They are the singular worst journalists in the world, and they are the leading cause of this manufactured consent. And out of those, the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph are certainly the worst at pushing these nonsense narratives to demonise the disabled. This is the latest gambit. This one's from the Telegraph, but this article was copied in the Daily Mail. The Mail article was released afterwards, so I'm assuming this just copied from the Telegraph, because the Daily Mail just copy shit from other newspapers all the time because they can't be asked doing any real work. Being a researcher in the Daily Mail office is just reading the other newspapers for what stories that they can steal. So I'm going to assume for this one that the Telegraph are the progenitors of this debate and this discussion, and I will aim most of my ire directly at them, and the two authors of this article, Zuping Chan and Luke Barr, the economics and assistant business editors at the Telegraph. The Telegraph has already been the epicenter of a lot of anti-disabled agitprop, such as a whole-ass article trying to get people angry at disability sufferers from having to claim for motability, which is the most kind of sickening kind of manufactured consent to demonize a minority I think I've ever seen. And this comes pretty close. This comes pretty close. What they're claiming in this article is that influencers on TikTok are driving a surge in mental health claims to get up to £69,000 of benefit from anything called Access to Work. Now, Access to Work is a scheme that the government runs that gives grants for support workers or for equipment or for special dispensation and modifications that need to be made for offices or homes for people with disabilities of loads of different kinds, both mental and physical, to help them stay in work, which is important. This is an important thing to do. We keep being told that disabled people need to be able to work, and the number of disabled people who are out of work is a really bad thing. So having a scheme that the government can run to help these people get back into work, because most of these people do, most disabled people don't like being unemployed, they want to be able to work, but they find it very difficult to do so because these things are limiting to their capacity to work. So being able to enable these things, to be able to help them be able to access work, as the name would imply, is a good use of government spending. It's a good use of state expenditure to get disabled people more fulfilling lives by doing something that they feel gives them some kind of motivation, and also increases our productive output by having more people in work, and is also something that it just helps disabled people be able to function the same way as everybody else when they are the victims of something outside of their control. What they're trying to claim is that these people are essentially, by calling them sickfluencers and driving a surge, essentially what they're trying to do is imply here that these people are trying to get others to fake it for free money from the government, that they're benefit scroungers, that they are trying to hoodwink the state into dishing them a bunch of free money for being untruthful about their status as somebody who is mentally ill or physically unwell, or the idea that people are pretending to be unwell because they think that they are when they aren't. Essentially, all to try and say these people are getting money they don't deserve from the state, which has been the Telegraph's drum that they've been banging on for years and years and years at this point. As you can see right at the start, they immediately try and poison the well by saying that it includes things like Apple smartwatches and noise-cancelling headphones and work coaches, right? Like, they try and say, well, they can have nearly £70,000 worth of funding, and it can include these certain things like Apple smartwatches, without actually telling us how many of these things have actually been bought, or indeed telling us how much the average person is paid out by this scheme, or indeed telling us who of which kind of disability gets what. A search on social media reveals dozens of users highlighting the benefits of Access to Work, which was initially launched to help deaf and blind people. And this is true. There have been people out there who have been highlighting that these things are available for the disabled. And you know what? This is a good thing. These things help people get access to work, hence the name. So it should be widely told to people that they don't have to suffer in silence. There was a girl who was in the Daily Mail article whose picture was used as a screenshot of one of her TikToks as the face of one of these sickfluencers. And one of the ones that is mentioned in this article is somebody who runs a business helping other people with disability and needed access to a support worker. And there was like £13,000, I think, that they claimed. But that is way above the average. So again, the idea that there is somehow a social contagion driving these things because people want free money, they've not presented any evidence of these things happening other than just, well, here's a couple of TikTokers. Actually, this is the person they were mentioning, Madeleine Alexander Grout, who claimed thousands of pounds from the scheme, providing financial advice and coaching to people with ADHD, literally trying to help other people with disability and mental health problems. And they're going after people trying to help each other. These journalists are genuinely sick. So they're trying to demonize somebody who is using her time on this earth as somebody with a disability to run a service to help other people with disability. This is the behavior of sick individuals. The people who wrote this article, and this person from the Daily Mail article as well, this Catherine Lawton person, you two, you're not getting away with this. You may just have copied from the Telegraph, but you're also as sick as the people who wrote this article just by jumping on the bandwagon to try and demonize ADHD sufferers, especially this one who's trying to help other sufferers as well. Spiralling costs related to access to work have led officials in the Department of Work and Pensions to raise concerns with Secretary Liz Kendall as they fear it is eating up a growing share of day-to-day spending. By a growing share, the amount that's being spent is 257 million. So it's 252, I believe, on actual expenditure, and the rest is on administration. So it's around about 250 million that's being spent. So £250 million on access to work? That's nothing. That's nothing. That is 12% of what has been saved by getting rid of the winter fuel payment. That these people in the Telegraph, they want to reinstate. I think we should reinstate it too. 2 billion is also not a large amount of money. But it's infinitely more, by infinitely I mean 8 times more, than what's being spent on access to work to help the disabled. And again, I don't know about you, even though I think that we should keep the winter fuel payment, it is not more important than helping the disabled. I'm sorry, it just isn't. Helping old people is not as important as helping the disabled. My humble opinion there. And yet these people will bang on about how Labour are hurting. They're hurting old people by taking away winter fuel. How dare they? Look into your heart, quote unquote, Mel Stride. Yet when it comes to disability benefit, when it comes to welfare being used to help the disabled be in work, which they say the disabled should be, getting mad about disabled people not being in work, they also get mad about spending to help them into work as well. Psychopathic behaviour from these people. And then they bring up a scare picture about disability welfare spending, even though this includes all the people who are out of work rather than these very small amount of people who are using this to help them get into work. Nevertheless, people can apply for the maximum of £69,260 each year, twice the average wage, to help pay for adjustments and do not have to be medically diagnosed with a health condition or disability to be eligible for the support. The government website specifically says you don't need to be medically diagnosed to apply. Doesn't mean you necessarily are going to get it. I find it far less likely that you're going to get access to these things if you don't have the actual medical diagnoses, or indeed a large amount of evidence to prove that you have a genuine suffering here. Like if you've got a broken leg, which is something you can claim for, but you don't have a medical diagnosis of broken leg, for example, you don't have to prove this thing through a medical examination. You can just tell them you have a broken leg, right? Even so, it doesn't guarantee you get any access to it. It's just about whether you can apply if you have the medical diagnosis. You might be awaiting one, and then you're getting ready for your access to work claim to start with, so you apply when you haven't got the diagnosis, and by the time your claim is finished, you do have a diagnosis. That could also be the case. But again, these people want to try and tell you that people are faking this thing for free money, when they have provided no evidence other than, well, maybe it's true, maybe we should look into it. But no evidence has been provided whatsoever that there are necessarily a bunch of people with no diagnosed mental health condition getting this money when they perceive that they shouldn't be getting it. Grants were initially used to help deaf and blind people start work by providing special equipment, as well as practical support including sign language interpreters. However, analysis of DWP figures shows that mental health condition is now the most cited primary reason for a claim, overtaking people who were granted support because they are deaf or hard of hearing in 2018. Mental health was cited as the primary reason behind 22,000 of the 67,000 payment approvals in the last financial year, with learning difficulties now the second most common condition. A decade ago, just 1,000 of the 24,000 claims were associated with people claiming for mental health. And this is true. There has been a very large increase, as this has come from the government website. Government data here has shown that people claiming mental health problems for access to work funding has absolutely increased. This is all true, and has indeed pushed up the cost of support very slightly. Again, when they say £21 million for special aids equipment, including smartwatches, noise-cancelling headphones and wobble boards, they don't tell you how much of this £20 million is exactly this. No, they want you to think that it's all smartwatches, rather than, I don't know, hearing aids and equipment. Because, wouldn't you know it, chat? If I bring up the actual breakdown of who gets spent on what, I can blow apart their entire narrative just by going to the government website and looking at their own figures. If you look at the percentage of total expenditure, not the number of people receiving the payment, but you look at the actual total expenditure on this system, the kind of disability that has the most spent on it, both in percentage terms and in terms of the amount that gets spent on them per person, are the deaf or hard of hearing. When they say special aids and equipment, they're referring to things for the people who are deaf. Most of the special equipment that's being bought is for people who have deaf or hard of hearing because they are 30% of expenditure, even though they are less than 10% of claimants. Most of the money gets spent on these people because they need both support workers and they need special equipment because they are deaf. They need hearing aids, which are not cheap. If you look at mental health conditions, they are increasing as a percentage of the people who are claiming and are now the highest percentage, 27% here. Whereas when you look at the amount that is actually spent on their help through access to work, it's only 11%. They get less than half of the average expenditure per person for mental health conditions than everybody else does. No other kind of illness that is included in people who get access to work benefits is as low per person in expenditure than mental health conditions. You may ask, Helena, well, still a lot of money, £69,000 potentially that could be spent on these people. So even if they are getting less than half of the average payment on this, they could still have a lot of money spent on them. What if I told you that the average amount spent per person on access to work is £4,000 fucking pounds? 252 million divided by the 67,000 people who have received payments in the last financial year, which is the stats that have been given to you in the article by The Telegraph. The Telegraph included this information in their article. You just do a division. You divide 252 million by 67,000. You find out, with information provided by the article, the average amount spent per person by access to work is £4,000. Not £69,000, not £50,000, not £13,000. No, it's £4,000. So people who have disabilities in terms of mental health, on average, are getting less than £2,000 per person. Less than £2,000. £6 a day. They're getting £6 a day help for their mental health problems from this scheme. Not £69,000 like this article would have you believe, just by saying that's the maximum and then just not bothering to tell people what the actual amount that's being spent is. Deliberately trying to invent a group to get angry at, pretending they exist when there clearly is evidence that they do not exist. Because they're trying to manufacture consent to make you hate the disabled, to try and justify even more slashing of welfare for the disabled, again, things that they need to help them be in work, which they say that they want people to be in work for. These people constantly bang on about how the disabled should be working and that we've got too many people off work, and they are attacking the single help from the government that is there to get these people back in work and help these people work. Not only is it evil, not is it genuinely sick and twisted and evil what these absolute monsters are doing, it's also completely incoherent, totally incoherent. And the worst part of all of this, the term sickfluencer that they've got is from that same Channel 4 documentary we watched last year with the guy from the fucking Spectator, Fraser Nelson, using it again as a platform to manufacture consent to hate the disabled. The evidence for this, couple of TikTokers. Like 2 TikTokers was the evidence that was used in the Daily Mail article, 1 in this article, just 1 TikToker was their evidence for this absolute litany of sickfluencers who are costing the government loads of money by getting people to apply for what? Less than £2,000 to help with their mental illness, to help them get into work.